OTF conclusions, a year in review. Do these knives make usable EDC knives? TLDR version is yes, but with a bit of a caveat, which is that you want one which is made to relatively tight tolerances. And we'll get to that when we get to edge retention. But the main hypotheses were surrounding debris ingress, edge retention, reliability, functionality, and frequency of the knife going off track, which is to say the knife, it's not technically off any track, however, it's just gliding. It's not caught between one of the flapper latches, so you can't do anything with it until you snap it in or out. So, first one, debris ingress. The hypothesis was that a relatively sealed design, carried point down, would actually experience greater mechanical fidelity than one which was open. And this was actually correct. You can do a number of different things which will sort of expose your pockets to dirt, debris, dust, one of which, I should note, is running a chainsaw, which pulls a lot of debris up and onto your person. And if you do that with something like a Spyderco, particularly something that's a tip-up Spyderco, like a Spyderco Military, you will guaranteed have grit in the action. It'll be a little shitty to run, and you've got to clean it out. These won't have that. None of them will, under these circumstances, and this is quite excellent. This area will sometimes pick up something. However, you'll notice from the wear patterns in the channels here, it runs mainly on the sides here, on the far edges. I don't know if that's visible. And so as a result, there's plenty of room for debris to go, and it's also quite easy to just clean out with a toothpick or whatever. No disassembly is actually required to clear that. So as far as debris ingress, these are superior to your typical side folding knives, making them more reliable. Edge retention. This is where it gets interesting. Microtech is not so great at the heat treats. They might claim that their heat treat protocols are good, and that might or might not be true, but I believe they hot grind because there is a surprising amount of damaged metal at the edge, which provides fairly poor edge retention. Once you get through that, things start to come back a bit, but this blade, for example, being LMAX, this is nothing like Bussy's, heat treat on LMAX. Bussy does a far better job. Spyderco does a far better job. So Microtech, for all of their precision, the edge retention, not so great. And this is true of not just this, but the UTX-75 as well, which is not sitting here, obviously. The other thing I will say is that on this, the relatively short grind height, the relatively low grind height, means that the wedge is that much steeper, and so the cutting capability in rigid materials is reduced. This rather, having a higher grind, doesn't have that problem. Other OTFs, which are not shown here, also are or are not affected by a relatively short, low blade height and low grind. But this gets to the other interesting problem of edge retention. If your knife is not made to fairly tight tolerances, like this one is, the bottom of the blade here will drag on the inside of the channel and dull itself on the inside of the handle. You'll notice Microtech, there it is, you'll notice they have little cutouts there, presumably to increase the clearance for that edge so that it doesn't dull itself on the inside of the handle. These don't have that and will dull themselves on the inside of the handle. And this one, in this case, because the flapper latch for the front is at the top on basically all these knives, also the flapper latch has the potential to drag on the edge if it's not notched. So that's something to be aware of. These made very cheaply do dull themselves on the inside of the handles. This problem, I think, dissipates somewhat with time because you can kind of work them and cut a channel in the handle and then change your apex geometry so the apex itself doesn't contact. But it's not ideal. It's not great. This doesn't have this problem, and other tighter tolerance manufactured OTFs I found also don't have this problem. Reliability we briefly touched on, and this will sort of roll in with how frequently it goes off track. It was a very rare thing. I can't think of a single time in, quite a while of carrying this. You can see there's a bit of wear on it, that I pulled this out and tried to fire it and it went off track. The only times that would happen would be if I opened it into something. And that'll obviously stop the blade, because there's really actually not a huge surplus of force, which is good because you don't want to batter the inside of the knife with just vast quantities of thrusting power. So reliability, actually quite good. Definitely not a toy. It's quite a reliable action. I should also note that these have been used quite a lot, not carried, but kept, or not carried as much, but kept in an area where there are a lot of packages to be opened and closed and such. And you'll notice in one taking apart that screw sheared, which is of course because these are cheese grade screws. It actually screwed, ironically, being put in with a driver with a set torque. So, to limit the amount of torque that could be applied to potentially strip out a screw. And we were well under the spec for what one of these screws would be in, well, granted, in the firearms industry, so not cheese grade. But, again, highly reliable. You can see here, it probably won't get dark enough. But, oh, there it is. You can see the tritium in these custom switches. Still working great. Functionality. How do these knives actually function compared to other knives? The geometry, as mentioned before on this Microtech, not so great. The other problem is this fucking tri-grip pattern, man, is hell on pockets. Not only is it hard on pockets, but if your pocket starts to fray a little bit, this will catch on that. It catches on a lot of things. It's also a little bit aggressively textured for comfort. It looks cool. It feels good if you're not working that hard, but if you start working it pretty hard, you pretty quickly start pulling up hot spots on your hands because of just how aggressive this is. It's just not quite ideal. I would put it not quite at Strider level or zero tolerance level, but it's certainly in the category of people would probably excuse this with the argument that, well, it's a tactical instrument, so you should be wearing gloves. So that's the thing. I have not tried the carbide glass breaker to break any glass, but whatever it is, it's an improvement over just a pointy spike. It will not dig you super uncomfortably. This, I'm surprised, I thought would sort of dig into you if you bent your leg. Doesn't really, not really a problem. And these are the only real complaint, aside from the sort of general lack of quality and, sloppiness. Hang on. You can see that play. The only real complaint is that the pocket clip, it starts higher out here and goes thinner back here and is a little thin for jeans pockets. But yeah, these, the nicer of these, I will say, is a perfectly EDCable knife, works fine, no problems. All of these claims that it's a toy or it's just a weapon or anything else like that, not true. I did inadvertently open this into myself once. Results were bleeding, but nothing that would require stitches. Healed in a couple days, no big deal. So the argument that these, or even the more powerful halos, which I also have one, are something that you'll open and it'll stab somebody, it'll stab into a board or something like that, totally not true. Completely false. And, laughably false, because if you think about it, if the knife opened with enough force to, say, stab through, what was it? I heard stories about like a 3/4 inch plywood sheet. If it opened with enough force to stab through a 3/4 inch plywood sheet, A, it would jump out of your hand every time you fired it, and B, for the times you weren't stabbing through a plywood sheet, where would all that energy go? Back into the knife. So the knife would jump rearward and then jump forward out of your hand. Totally not going to happen. Would batter itself to death. Not plausible. Or any of that shit. So, ending it before 10 minutes. Hope you guys enjoyed or hated it or whatever. See you at the next video.